Hey friends, if like some leatherworkers you absolutely despise edge painting, and I don't blame you, I actually love it personally, but you might avoid it like the bubonic plague. In today's video I'm going to teach you exactly how to bind your edge so you don't ever need to paint ever again if you decide you don't want to. So I just showed you, so for the leather, for the exterior we're going to be using a Italian vegetable tan shoulder, it's 1.1 millimeters, and for the lining, which is going to be the light grey blue tingy leather, I'm not quite sure how to describe it, is a French goat skin from Auran. And it's 0.8 millimeters. It's the same thickness as the piping, which is the orange one. Now, this is quite a simple way of doing it. However, it can really elevate your piece. It can be absolutely stunning when you do it right. You might think these color choices are a little bit bizarre, but it's mainly just for the camera so you can actually see what I'm doing. So when you're doing the dark blue is acting as the exterior of the bag, basically, and the grey is the lining of the bag, just to give you a bit of clarification. For the exterior and the lining, we always only glue 10 millimeters from the exterior, from the edge, 10 millimeters in. If you never made piping before, this strip is 20 millimeters wide. And it's a 1 millimeter thick cord. You can use many different types of cord. I got this one, it's a jewelry making cord. Works really well for this, but you can get any lace basically. It's really important to scratch off the surface of the leather before you glue it, and this is the same for any project. If you're gluing something, it will not stick to grain. You have to scrape it off. So, well, sometimes you don't. Sometimes if it's unfinished, you can get away with it. But if it's a finished leather, you have to scrape off the grain. So, it's really important when you're doing a piped seam, because normally, if you weren't binding this, you'd be painting this edge. This is just the standard piped seam. And when you're doing this, you only want to glue, it's about 5 or 6 millimeters from the edge, because if you go anywhere near where that cord is, you'll see the glue. So we're going to punch through at this point, because we're going to be stitching through the back of this layer. So we're going to punch the holes as close to the piping as we can possibly get them. It's about 8 millimeters from the edge. I know it's quite far in, but it's because that's how you do piping. That's just how it's done. You can sand it down afterwards if you like, but this is how piping is done most of the time. Once you've glued it together, that edge would normally be painted. We're obviously not going to paint it today. We're obviously going to bind it. So it's really important that you get this to stick really well, because when you're stitching through this much layer, this many layers, it's about 10 mil of leather we're going to be going through. So to measure this, you want to get a strip of the same leather that you're going to be binding it with. You want to wrap it round, and then you're going to mark off at the right where it meets the tip of the piping. And then we're going to cut that out in a strip of the length of whatever it is that we're going to be binding. So this is just the length of the pieces that I'm working with today for this demonstration. And it's really important, really important, that you skive that edge to 0, because if you don't, when you fold it in half, because each side of this is going to be folded in half, it's a 10 millimeter fold. It's much, well, 20 mil technically, because it's 10 mil over another 10 mil, so it's a 20 mil fold. So it's really important that you skive that to 0, otherwise you'll get a really lumpy fold here. Little trick is to put a ruler down and just put that first little crease into the leather before you fold it. It just makes your life a lot easier. And use that tape as a guide, because that tape is essentially straight. It's not quite straight, but it's straight enough for what we're doing. So once you've folded that over, we're actually going to mark a line of stitches. Now, I forgot to mark the second line, and I regretted it. So after you've done your first line of stitches down one side of this, which I'm doing now, you also want to do exactly the same thing on the other side of this binding strip. So you want both sides to be punched, otherwise you're going to get an uneven stitch. Now obviously I'm going to be using a roundel because you always use a roundel when you're stitching like this. If you don't have a roundel, I would recommend getting one because they're very, very useful in leathercraft. This one is from Okada Tools in Japan. And this is why I made a mistake of not punching through. This is where it really shows, because this line of stitches is going to be a bit uneven, but the point remains that this is how you would do it. So you push through with your roundel, because obviously one side of the actual bag, I'm saying that in air quotes, the blue panels is not punched, so we have to push through it with our roundel. And you can see where my stitching line is a little bit rough on the other side, but it doesn't really matter for this demonstration. So it would look really, really even if I had punched through. Now obviously a smart person, which I am not evidently, would use a matching thread if this was actually a bag that I was making, because then it would be practically invisible. But for the purposes of the video, I thought, why not use a really, really bold leather and a really bold thread so you can actually see what I'm doing. So it's not very easy because it's a 10mm, well roughly 10, it's probably about 12mm of leather that you're pushing through, that you're stitching through. So do take your time. This is a 0.5mm thread. It's really quite a thick thread. 0.55 I believe it is M50 from Misi. And that is basically it. Once you've stitched it, tap it, fold the exterior out so you can see the piping itself, and then punch it and then tap it down with your hammer to give it a nice crease on the exterior, just like this. It's like I'm voicing over, who knew? And that's how you do it. It's really, really simple, but it can elevate the inside of your bag really nicely.